you for the history books, just in case anybody's interested in what goes on here.
I've had some concerns about your camera.
That's right, I'm trying to set up so nobody else can be seen apart from my beautiful image, from that image.
Could you point it from that corner?
Well, it's the same problem. The audience, they're happy because it's a person. I suggested that the person might move to another seat if it worries her, but I can do it there, but I have to set it up again. It'll just be a bit delay because obviously I'm trying to take my own picture.
There are people that don't want to be filmed.
I understand that entirely. I'm more than happy that. But is everybody that side happy?
No problems.
Can you have a look, John, and see if I'm on camera here? Can you have a look through?
Yeah, I'm not very good at this type of film production. I'm no good at social media either.
Just look in there and see if
Oh my God, it looks dreadful. I'll just come back a bit.
Right.
Right, okay, Mike, where you go?
I did say at the outset of my opening that I'm pretty relaxed about filming inquiries, but I do also have to balance that against individuals, and if they do object, I will say no cameras.
I've no problem at all with that, but obviously it's sometimes a little bit difficult trying to take pictures of yourself to set it up and so on. Anyway.
Please.
Okay, yeah, I just want to start off with Mrs. Stedman if I can. I should combine my whole thing into one if I can. Just one little thing that's been bugging me. When you were doing your discussion with Barrister's Wart, it kept on coming up things like a hospital building, a landmark with distinct character. When you use that expression, which you quote from various things, distinct character doesn't necessarily imply good character, does it? Distinct character could be bad character.
Character is subjective.
Yeah, but
subjective, so
that's right.
it can be good or bad.
That's right. Okay, that's what I'm telling you. So, yeah, I try and keep within my time frame. I've been operating in Jersey as a building designer since the beginning of the first island plan and the first planning law. And I've seen it develop over the years. Now, as we've discussed, I tried to touch upon the fact that the concept of outline planning has developed over the years. There was no provision under the original law for outline planning permissions. They were granted by the planning office illegally for many, many years. And this was something I battled on for years and years and years. Under the new law, in conjunction with the new island planning law, the island plan, they've changed that. So there is the concept of outline planning. But there's also the bylaw application, so you can do outline planning, and bylaw. I mean, there are 3 applications you can make. If you want to combine them all, you could do. Obviously, on a project of this scale, you wouldn't do so but at the outline planning, if you go for outline planning, there has to be sufficient information in order that a proper decision can be made. Would you agree with that?
I think actually the rule is not only do you need sufficient information to make a robust decision, you also need to be certain that the subsequent decisions can be made clearly in accordance with the original decision. So you need the decision has to lead on to that second part, and there should be no discrepancy between what's granted in outline and then what will be considered a reserve matter. So you're absolutely right, you need that amount of information. But you can also allow a second stage to evolve on the basis of the initial information that we've...
The trouble is, on a building of this complexity, the number of restrictions or so on, the impositions that will be on the outline planning permit will be so great that it will be much easier just to put in a more detailed out planning permission from the outset. Would you agree with that?
There's two issues there. In order for a full application to be made, there's a significant amount of design work is required, and in order to complete that design work, it's normal to have a contractor on board. At some point, a principle of a development being acceptable needs to be reached, and that's where the hospital project has reached now. In order to continue the work that was described by Mr. Morgan and Mr. Lewis on Monday, and to reflect the desires of the health department that Mrs. O'Shea and Mr. Blaze indicated, there needs to be an idea that actually this work isn't going to be in vain. It's actually moving forward to a position of certainty.
obviously I'm concerned more with the public interest in this and the public appreciation as we discussed it. The information that's available for the general public to see what they're getting. Now, of course, as I well know, when it gets to the building bylaw stage, that's when substantial alterations are made, because all of a sudden heating and ventilating engineers suddenly find they need ventilation ducts and flues sprouting out all over the building, which were no way mentioned in the outline planning in the first place.
You're absolutely right, but imagine if we'd gone to the point of designing where flues and ventilation ducts go to and the resources that would take without actually knowing whether...
Well, that's the whole point.
Absolutely right, it's the whole point.
That's what I'm getting at. But if you had a more detailed outline planning, you'd know better, more accurately where those are and what size plant rooms are going to be provided and whether they're accurate. If you just leave it as a box, a concrete box, with no details about it, you've got no idea the size of the plant room, where the flues are going, ventilation system, and bear in mind ventilation system are noise and air coming out, going in, all sorts of aggravation.
We have information, we know how that's going to work, and that was shown in the plans that Mr. Place went through, and Mr. Morgan and Mr. Lewis. So, in general, we do, but we don't know where the plug sockets are going. At some point, we will need to know where the plug sockets are going. But
Where the what, sir? The bus stops?
To get down to that detail at this stage, we need to know the principle of actually doing the building is acceptable.
Yeah, but if you're doing an access strategy, which you ought to be doing on a building of this scale, you would know where the bus stops are going, because that is an integral part, especially of a building of this sort, where there's a lot of disabilities involved. You'd know exactly where the bus stops are going, right from the beginning.
It's an iterative approach. We've never made any disguise of it. And I've got to stress that the next stage that we hope to get to, which is what the external appearance of the building will be, and accompanying that, an idea of the floor layouts and how the hospital will function. We want to consult on that before we make that reserve matters application. We want to get that right. We want to engage with people to say, before we put this reserve matters application in, what do people think? What have we got right? What have we got wrong? Where can we improve it? So we're committed to doing that, and that is something tangible. But in order to do that work, we need to establish a principle that work won't be in vain.
One of the old battlegrounds that used to arise time and time again, one of the old system when you used to operate these illegal outline planning permissions, that you tried to overcome with the amended planning law and the island plans, the concept of certainty, so that there would be certainty. The island plan would lay down very specific, green zone was specific, you can't build in a green zone. That's a simplistic view of it. But there were very certain guidelines. Now this seems to be moving away from all that, and the outline planning would, as I say, would have sufficient detail for people to have a realistic appraisal of what's entailed for the building and what's entailed for them, for the planning office, so you can come to all your conclusions. But now we're at this extraordinary development here of the Rochdale element. We seem to be putting all that into reverse. We seem to be taking away the certainty, and so we can have a concrete box because of UK.
I don't think so. The guidance from the Ministry is clear that outline applications are intended to indicate whether a development is broadly acceptable. So that's the key test that we've got to look at. Is it broadly acceptable to create a building within the parameters that we've suggested? Well,
I don't know whether I was present. I parted at the previous island plan, the 2011 this plan which we're now working to. I took part in the previous planning inquiries which were related to that, to the draft plans, which were in 2008, 2009, I think, and there was considerable discussion on all these things. And that was one of the themes, as far as I know, there was discussion about all these, the hope of having design documents which were supplementary. We wanted to eliminate all that. We wanted it specific in the island plan. People knew what they were getting. But we've had interminable discussions under the Rochdale concept about whether this is allowed, whether that's permissible. I mean, the whole island plan, the planning law concept was that there would be simple certainty. People knew what it was all about. But we're just not getting that, are we?
Well, this is as we keep saying, this is the biggest public infrastructure investment the island's ever made. The guidance on outline applications say applications for outline planning permission are generally only appropriate for major proposals. This is the biggest proposal that Jersey has ever had. We have to take it stage at a time. We have to design it as an iterative process. So consequently, an outline application is appropriate in accordance with the Minister's guidance. It's also appropriate in a practical sense of developing the project, moving towards
Well,
the new hospital.
We're £17 million worth of expenditure so far, and we're not actually even got a proper, I say, island outline planning application yet, and we haven't even reached that stage. So I don't know what the cost will be for the next stage. I've no idea. Let's just go back to the island plan. When that was introduced, when this was the draft island plan for this one. This is when they were discussed. The current island plan, they said, was approved by the states in July 2000, but the rate of change in many spheres of island life over the past 6 years has necessitated an early review of the plan. This has been identified and afforded a high priority by the Council of Ministers. The new island plan, which will become the Island Plan 2010, 2011 in fact, will set the framework for development in Jersey to 2019. It needs to be able to respond to anticipated changes over this time period. The significant and strategic issues that will need to be addressed are summarised as follows, and it goes on. Do you think, now, bearing in mind the changes that have taken place since this island plan came in, do you think this island plan is still fit for purpose?
Well, we think it's development according to the island plan, so it's fit for our purposes.
We're not in that situation then where it needs to be, that had to be brought forward. The review that created had to be brought forward because the old island plan was no longer acceptable.
That was in 2010.
You don't think that's the same?
We have, the island plan was adopted in 2011 and revised in 2014, so it is the island plan, and the law is clear that the island plan is the most significant material consideration in looking at planning applications. The island plan also says that new healthcare facilities should be, in the first instance, built on existing healthcare sites.
But they would have said the same about the old island plan. It's there in place until, but they brought it forward. The review was brought forward because the island had changed.
That's what we're doing, and that was adopted in 2011, it was revised in 2014.
Right.
We are building on an existing healthcare site, just like the island plan
Right.
anticipates.
Well, of course, that's one of the things. This is part of the argument for having it on the existing site because therefore it fits in with your concept of what the island plan is. If you put it on the existing site, if you had properly looked at other sites, that would not have been quite so easy to resolve, would it?
It doesn't. I don't think there's much room for interpretation in the policy. It says new healthcare facilities should be on existing healthcare sites. So that's if we were proposing it not on an existing healthcare site, we would have to argue why that policy didn't apply. But we're not doing that.
But that would have precluded other sites then.
We are applying on a site in accordance with the island plan.
So looking at other sites was a waste of time, was it?
This application accords with the island plan. I don't think looking at other sites was a waste of time. It informed the state's decision, P110-2016, which came after a long and significant process of considering all kinds of sites. There is reams and reams of information out there that I would imagine many of the people in the room are aware of how long the process took and how many sites were looked at, the level of discussion that was had about different sites, and all that came to a point in December last year when the state considered, against the context of all the work that was done, all the discussions, all the scrutiny hearings, all the state's debates, all those things led to a point in December last year when the State's Assembly said the site that we want for the new hospital, the site we prefer, is the existing hospital site.
I just want to go on to something else that was in the previous plan. It's in this plan, and it was in the previous plan before the previous plan. It's about the 350 international treaties, conventions and protocols. Now, Mrs. Steedman has said she's considered all material facts, policies, whatever, that are relative to this application as far as her terms of reference are concerned. Have you looked at international obligations?
The policies in the plan and the assessments that are undertaken reflect those.
Well, yes, they were talking about privacy. Obviously, that's a human rights thing, that's international obligations. Have you looked at privacy in the context of human rights obligations? Have you looked at it?
Not specific to human rights, to that.
Well, I mean, is that a material consideration then for this application?
What privacy?
Well, privacy you say, so that's a human rights implication, so there are international obligations on privacy under many human rights obligations.
It's been looked at as a consideration for this application.
In the draft, it said the island is subject to more than 350 international treaties, conventions and protocols, which carry legal and moral commitments as well as rights and obligations under international law. Those particularly relevant to the island plan include those concerning the environment. There are other agreements covering social and economic matters, such as human rights law, which will impact indirectly on the planning system and thus need to be taken into account. Well, which ones have you taken into account?
The policies reflect that context that you set out, and the assessments will taken.
There are 350. Have you taken 350 conventions into account? Clearly not, obviously not, because that figure hasn't changed for 3 island plans, so obviously the figure has actually changed, so obviously the planning office is not very aware about international obligations anyway, but even if suppose there was 350, how many of them would you have to take into consideration and an appraisal of a scheme like this?
I think the island plan has regard to those 350 obligations. Not all of them apply to individual policies. But for example, the Valletta Convention is an international obligation that talks about the protection of heritage. So, the heritage part of the island plan reflects the obligations in the Valletta Convention. So, and so forth for other, the Aarhus Convention about waste, all these conventions are about individual things. For example, the Ramsar Convention, people in the room are probably aware of. The policies in the island plan reflect the obligations relative to the protection of wetlands that the Ramsar
Yeah, but the sort of obligations that I'm more interested in, I'm not so much an armor about, I'm more about economic, social and cultural rights, European Convention of Human Rights, civil and political rights, United Nations Council of Europe, ILO, industrial labour rights. These are all things which have an implication as far as a project of this manifestation. I mean, disability. We've now got disability rights is on its way. Disability discrimination. By the time this building is finished, disability discrimination will be in place in Jersey, we hope.
I think if you go back to the adoption process of the island plan, the Minister of the Environment would have had to do a compliance test to see whether it complied with those international conventions. Now, it's been adopted, no one's challenged it, no one said that these policies are not in accordance with those conventions, whether they're legal or moral. The fact is, as applicants, we are entitled to take the island plan as the development plan we must judge our application.
But you feel you can pick and choose, at your level of determination, you can pick and choose which. Let me just give you a specific. We've had a speaker who spoke very strongly about the damage that this building is going to cause to health of people. And he actually claimed that it will kill some children, will be killed during the process of demolition, building, and during the use of this building. Now, Jersey has just ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now, obviously, the Convention on the Rights of the Child is very much relative to the welfare of children. And bearing in mind, we've just come through a £25 billion inquiry into the abuses that have been going on with children in this island since the war. So there's a huge backlog of failure as far as this. Now, Jersey, partly because of that inquiry, has ratified the Convention on Human Rights, which has just come into place. It's been ratified for local implementation. Have you taken any account of it? These concerns about the welfare, health of children, it's the whole family, not just the child, of people in the use of this building.
I'm going to interrupt you there. I think this is going to just carry on in the same vein. You're going to get the same answers. I'm familiar with the issues that you're raising. My focus will be on an assessment against the island plan.
Well, these are implications, are they not?
You are now well over 12 minutes.
Wow.
I do have other people that I need to get on, so if you could make the points and we can get through.
Well, I would just close on that. I'm going to just come back to you a few more minutes, if I may. I find it deplorable that we're attempting. I mean, the implication, the island plan, it was written in there, these will be integral part of it, and they will be considered. Now, we're saying we're not considering them. Okay, that's what I'm doing. I was especially pleased to hear Mr. McCarthy's evidence. I've never met the guy, I don't know him, because he clarified how inadequately the public participation has been organised for this thing. And as we've seen, there are 75, I think, written submissions from the public. I think there's one in favour, but I've attended as much as I can of what's been going on. And the opportunity to discuss the proposals has been minimal. Bear in mind the discussion isn't just going around looking at stuff on a wall. You need more than that to get to understand what the project is all about.
I think it's a little both. There's been a significant amount of public engagement in this. I I don't want to get into what constitutes a significant amount. We, as part of the evidence we submitted to the inspector, in order to set context, we did indicate the amount of the 200 or so events that take place.
Well,
we're satisfied that we've...
I submitted, as you know,
That doesn't mean to say that we're resting on our laurels. We will further engage with people later in the process, and I'm willing to have that enshrined as a condition attached to any planning permission, that there needs to be a period of consultation, and we need to demonstrate that we've done that before we submit the reserve application.
one of the problems that the inspector may not realise is that the government of this island is forever putting things out to so-called consultation. The public is swamped with things, and the public just do not have the expertise or knowledge or time to respond to them. On things like, if it's about the legal aid system, the lawyers will respond. But other things generally, disability discrimination, those sort of things, trying to produce an access strategy for the whole island, these things are just beyond the ability. And it's so lacking, as you will have seen on this, that we've got political leaders who said they were in the States and they saw this presentation, and if now, knowing what they know now, they would have voted against it as opposed to for it. This is the level of lack of understanding. This is what the inspector needs to understand. This is part of what they were in the child inquiry. This is the Jersey way. Things are done with superficial, incomplete information. The laws that do apply are not applied. They're not followed through. And I think this is it's a misleading application. It's more than misleading. I would go further than what Senator Ferguson said. I think it's deliberately misleading in order that the public don't know the information. And bear in mind, there's a whole thing going around the world at the moment about Paradise Island. And I think Paradise Island Plan 2011 is a little thought we ought to put in our mind, because this typifies the way this island is conducted. They all talk about the Jersey way and all this thing. But this is typical of the way it's to present to the public the minimum information so we can rubber stamp it, get an approval, and then carry on regardless. And I think it's a quite disgraceful exercise. I will leave it there because I'm aware of your timescale, but there was much more I would say. And I did submit, as you know, my videos to show a chronology of the attempts of the public to engage, demonstrations that did take place, and the dissent that did take place, and the failure of the government to respond to that, and the way they just overnight adopted this plan for this site. And I think the whole procedure is totally, well, I think it's illegal.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Right, we're going to Mr.